Welcome to the Self-Defense Warrior Podcast, where our hosts, Jeffrey Wilson and Pat Militich, probe the minds of experts from a vast spectrum of knowledge on how to best prepare for the inevitable emergency situation to come. Jeffrey and Pat and the Self-Defense Warrior Podcast are your insurance policy moving forward. And now, here they are, the hosts of the Self-Defense Warrior Podcast, Jeffrey Wilson and Pat Militich.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Self-Defense Warrior, the 360-degree viewpoint and approach to asymmetrical self-defense. Jeffrey Wilson is joining me today, of course, as always, my co-host. Jeffrey, how are you?
I'm doing well, my friend, doing well. I've been nursing this like weird head cold for like the last, I never get sick, but it's like when it does, it's this like long drawn, not really super debilitating, but like my nose been leaking. Now I'm just feeling a little wonky, but blessed to be here, bro. Blessed to have another chat with you. Had a brief chat here with our guest today and looking forward to getting into it.
Yeah, so let's get to our guest. Mariah Prussia is her name, and she's done a lot of things. This is kind of a hard approach, actually, to introducing this wonderful person because there are so many things on the list here that she's accomplished, so to speak. So I'm going to go down. I'm going to try not to embarrass her too much, I guess, with some of this, but there's just a lot of accolades here, Jeff, for me to read. Okay, can I do that for you and our guest? So she was 2020 North Dakota Mother of the Year. She's an ACE certified personal trainer. She founded DefineTheFight.com, which is, we'll learn about that as we go on. Certified IBNFC nutritional coach, host of Throwdown, the Mariah Prussia radio show for quite a while, freelance writer, Area Woman magazine, Reiki practitioner, part of the Fargo, North Dakota Police Department, youth programs, adjunct professor at Minnesota State University, Fargo first sanctioned professional female MMA fighter, also has done professional boxing, has done coaching, is a mindset coach, a motivational speaker, and we can go on and on and on. But Mariah, welcome to the show, and thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me on.
It's quite
so
a
Jeff, you spoke to her for a little while. Go ahead and I'll let you kick it off with questions. How's that?
What? Say it again?
I'll let you kick it off with questions.
Oh man, where do we start? I mean, I just was having a kind of a brief conversation with her, but I guess we'll just kind of jump neck deep into some of the stuff she was talking about. What she was asking kind of how I was doing. And again, it's not about suffering because long story short, we're talking about mental mindset, how we get through certain just curveballs in life. And I was just telling her this last year for me, and again, I'm not tying myself to the tree of woe because I know we're all going through something, but it's just been absolutely kind of maddening for me. Between losing loved ones. I mean, the last few years have just been crazy for all of us, COVID, et cetera. But the last year has been really, really crazy. And I was telling her in the midst of like all of this madness, I'd sometimes just get a little overwhelmed with how much more I have than I don't have. I'm still festooned with all these different blessings. I mean, I've lost some really close loved ones in my life and crazy shit's been going on, but it's like, moment I have this breath, I have my family still, I have, I stand up on my 2 feet, I'm grabbing my pen with my hands there. I mean, just the simple things that we tend to overlook. So Mariah was talking about, and she's a mental mind coach. Talk to us a little bit about how perspective is when dealing with all the different curveballs that we have in life. Instead of, in my opinion, I've been doing the whole, this is happening for me, not to me, but talk to us about how mind state and mental perspective is not only when it's good, but definitely when it's bad.
I think each of us have our own challenges. One of the things I posted today is without the test, how do you have the testimony? And we've all had different tests and different life ambushes that have occurred to us. And the reality is if we don't have challenges, if we don't have the point where we're knocked down, then how do we expect to grow? And that's really what it comes down to is if we can look at lessons in life and things that feel completely debilitating where it's like, wow, I can't move forward. The reality is that's a choice. So when we look at, okay, this is a growth phase and look at it from that and define it and then start moving forward. That's really what it comes down to. So like define the fight. What does that come from? Well, what is that fight? What are you fighting for in life? Or what are you fighting against? Because sometimes we resist change when the change is actually what you need in life. So how do you expect to win the fight until you define what the fight truly is?
And that's definitely obviously a huge part of the mental mindset, listening to the voice we tell ourselves of whatever it is, I'll never get through this, et cetera. And it's a discipline. It's not something that comes easy without a doubt, because especially in the face of loss of family members, or, big jobs or marriages, et cetera, it's something we're very used to, and we're creatures of habit. So like when things do monumentally in our lives, we have to have the right mindset to get ourselves through it. Otherwise, I mean, almost going back to our last conversation with Nick Spawn, we have our life, which in my opinion, we're infinite conscious awareness, and we have our life situation. We so often allow our mindset to be determined by our life situation, whether it's job or relationships, loss of a loved one. So I think it's just hugely important that our mind stays right in the face of monumental adversity.
Well, and it requires practice, and it requires commitment. And that's where most people drop the ball. So we look at fitness, right? New Year's resolutions are just around the corner. And it comes down to, 4-week life, 6 weeks, and then eventually people fall off the wagon. Well, now if you look at fitness, if you look at mindset as a relationship, if you were in a significantly bad relationship and all of a sudden it ended, would you revisit that same relationship in January again when the resolutions are coming around? Oh, things have changed, so on and so forth. Well, then you recognize 4 to 6 weeks later, you did the same thing you did before, and then the relationship falls to the wayside again. And then people revisit it again and again and again. Well, there has to be change. Now, you use the term used to, right? People get used to doing A, B, C, D, and E. Well, if you're used to it, you need to spice it up a little bit too, because now you're comfortable. Let's get comfortable in being uncomfortable. And that's when things start coming into play. So with the mind, you talk about death, you talk about sickness, and all of the different things, right, that you've experienced, that all of us have experienced in some way, shape, or form. But now, what are those action items that you're taking behind the scenes before those situations happen to improve your mental state of mind? You talk about breath work, you talk about AM rituals, PM rituals. Like at the end of the day, are you debriefing? Where did I do well, but where can I do better? Because if we think that we're nailing the world, we're just knocking it out left and right, the reality is we all have areas of improvement and areas of growth that we can become better at, because you're never going to be a 10. Pat and I have talked about, or I've spoke about climbing the mountains, right? The different mountains. You get to the top of the mountain, and then it's like a false summit. Then there's another mountain for you to climb, unless you feel comfortable and you want to stay. Now you've just decided that your growth is going to end.
Well, and
yeah,
Jeff, you always talk about the new shoe crew is what Jeff calls the.
I stole that from my brother, but yeah, the New Year's Eve people. But I mean, and again, and it goes back to almost what we were talking about Nick. It's like, when the motivation is gone, for those first 3 or 4 weeks after the New Year's resolution, you got to have that discipline. And if you've already set your mind up, and basically, long story short, I'm asking, how much does this have to do with resetting the unconscious, if you will? Because we're so set in our ways a lot of times, because the way our unconscious was written 0 to 7, and we've been playing out that unconscious downloaded program since we were 0 to 7. And so it's more than just like, hey, I have new shoes, I'm going to the gym, I'm going to lose weight, because like you said, statistically, those things fall off after a few weeks, and you just go back to being what you were, because you haven't retrained the subconscious or unconscious rather to be uncomfortable, like you said, to embrace the suck, or to embrace being uncomfortable and out of that comfort zone.
Right. So, you're talking about the mental mountain. So there's different ways that people look at the mental mountain. People look at mental as mental health. But what areas are you looking to learn more knowledge? So is that reading? Is that, different types of certification, going into energy work so that you can actually understand it, so you can get to a deeper level of consciousness? Now, I think a lot of people in the world today are actually opening up spiritually. And I think it scares the hell out of people who are in power. And the reason why I think it scares them is because they can't control people when they have gone to a deeper level of consciousness to truly understand what is going on in their life. We talk about warriors, right? So you have to win the battle in your mind before you step foot on the battlefield. So if you're not doing that, how do you expect to move forward? Or unforeseen circumstances, how do you expect to win? The likelihood of success is pretty slim if you're not working on those intricate pieces within your mind. And you talk about discipline, but now let's talk about commitment. What is your level of commitment? People will set goals. They set goals in life. I'm going to achieve this goal, but how many people are actually committed to achieving the goal? So, that's where it comes down to, is a lot of different pieces. And what I can say for most people is, when it comes to falling off from a goal, it's usually because there's trauma from the past that they haven't healed from. So now it's taking that dirt dive into the emotional trenches to start healing from trauma, because trauma will show up in a different way, shape, or form. It's almost like, okay, I'm walking on a road. Here's a little pebble. I'm just going to kick that pebble, AKA your trauma, to the side. Not a big deal. I can handle it. Now, all of a sudden, you have a larger rock that shows up. Same trauma, but now it's growing. You can pick it up. You can throw it off to the side of the road. Now, all of a sudden, you've got a damn boulder that's on the road. So you can't move that, but I can walk around it. And now pretty soon it's a wall where you feel so defeated that you can't even climb the wall. So when we can start getting into those pieces, you're not going to heal through all of your trauma at one moment in time. You're only going to be allowed to heal certain pieces that you are able to recognize and that your body can cope with. So little pieces, once you work through that, you're like, life is good. I feel great. I healed. 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road, then all of a sudden something brings forth a trigger, or something happens, and now more pieces of that trauma starts to surface. So when we start working through all of this trauma, now spiritual awakening actually really starts getting interesting and gets deeper, and you're able to see things that you never thought you'd be able to see before, and gifts start coming to the surface.
And it's got to be daunting, because oftentimes we have a lot of stuff to unpack, and I just don't think, and I could be wrong, it just seems like people don't have the patience for that process. They want it to be, especially in this world of instant gratification, I want to be able to have one session with my therapist and be all good to go. And like you said, you're good to go, and then something else comes down the line that triggers you, and you realize, no, I still have some work to do. But I'm just wondering, I mean, I guess there's probably not a lot of statistics on it, but how people don't come out the other side because they don't have patience for that very long process. And especially if you have way more trauma to unpackage, that's probably even more daunting to come out the other side, at least halfway sane.
I think it's the pain. I think they're scared of the pain, or the fear of what they're going to unpack. It's pain. So we've all experienced pain, and emotional pain and trauma is heavy. Now, I work through it, and there's still things that come to the surface that I have to deal with. But I wouldn't change any of it, Jeff. I wouldn't change the work that I did to be to where I am today. In the statement or the quote that says, turn your pain into purpose. So that pain that I've experienced in my past is now my purpose. I want to be able to live in acts of service. I want to help people heal and move through their pain, because when they do that, now other people are in acts of service, and you start creating a huge group and an army of light workers. And that's what life is all about, is recognizing that our mission in life is larger than ourselves. And far too often people are living in their ego, because it's the need to wanting to fill. I have to fill my ego. I have to be right? The opinions of the world right now, it's like, I got to get in the last word. What if I told you that you didn't have to get in the last word, right? What if I told you didn't have to get in the last word, and you would be happy and you would create change? Now, all of a sudden, light bulbs start coming off, but people are scared. They're scared to be vulnerable. They're scared to feel that pain, but they're also, scared to not feed their ego because they've been feeding it for far too long. So again, it comes back to when you're talking about the brain, retraining it where we don't have to feed it, meaning ego. We have to feed ourselves, but not our ego.
I have to say that was, for many years, in a bar or whatever, like, what's the thing you don't want to talk about, like spirituality or religion or politics. And sure enough, I'd be pony up and, the arguments would happen. I wouldn't do the whole, like, hey, you're a libtard or you're a this tard or you're lesser than because you don't think the way I do. But I would get into that, like, back and forth, like, no, dude, you got to understand. And listen, just like, I just stopped caring about that. I don't know. I still have my own work with ego, like we all do, but I mentioned this a lot probably on the show and just generally. I posted a meme where it was like, I'm at the stage of my life where I just avoid arguments. If you tell me 1 + 1 is 7, I'm like, hell yeah, dude, enjoy. You're absolutely right. You know what I mean? I don't care. We're all on our own path. But I mean, I think that's something. Let me ask you about this, because I asked this about Nick Spawn. I heard this from a gentleman by the name of Eckhart Tolle, and I don't know if you've heard of him or not. He was talking about that need to be right, that needing to get the last word is all about controlling external circumstances. And ultimately, it's a death, because what's the one huge external circumstance that none of us can control? And that's death. And it could be a leap, but I just found it very fascinating that need to be right, that need to get the last word, ego's dominating, your whole cosmology and your view of the world. And ultimately that has to do with potentially fear of that ultimate reality that none of us can escape. Thoughts on that?
Well, I think we're all going to die. I mean, I haven't met anybody who's immortal. Not yet.
But ultimately that fear, that need to be right and control, even though the argument has nothing to do with death, it's about controlling the external circumstances of this argument, which is an extension, possibly more latently or unconsciously, that big external circumstance, like I said, that none of us can control. I could be wrong, but I find it interesting.
So we say ego, but then we also say control. And what if we let go of control of certain things in our life? What if we let go and we allowed what God or the universe actually wants to come into play? And we sit back, we get in the driver's seat, we still take action on the things that we want to do in life and the lives that we want to help create change, right? But what if we just sat back and allowed the flow to happen? Now, I want to make sure that I emphasize, I'm not saying don't work. I'm saying you need to work. But at the same point, listen. So that also means listening in conversations. So about the last word, so on and so forth. But what if you just had this conversation in your head and you didn't even have to share it? Why do you always have to have a word? Sometimes the best thing to do for us is to listen, which also means to help ourselves grow. If we don't agree with somebody, start listening to podcasts that you don't agree with. Start listening to music that you don't agree with, because now you're opening your mind to how somebody else thinks. And then you can sit back and think about that and then have more rational or open windows or an open mind of what is life, because people see things differently. And what if we took how you view something and how Pat views something might be completely different, kind of the same. But what if you're able to merge those different windows together, and now all of a sudden you might be impacting 10 here, he might be impacting 10. But now what if you merge those different pieces together and all of a sudden you're reaching millions?
Well, I have to butt in here. I have tried watching The View, Mariah, and it did not work.
Watching what? Do you say The View?
I tried watching The View. It did not gel well with me. But something that we normally cover in the beginning of every show, so people are wondering, how you have these viewpoints and your experiences and everything else. We haven't given you the opportunity of where you've gained your viewpoints from through your past experiences and kind of what molded you. So you could fill our listeners in a little bit on that.
So there's the reason when I look at like self-defense, when we talk about fighting, a lot of people think that I teach self-defense or I was fighting is because of different things that I had experienced in my past. The reason why I fought is because I needed something more. I needed a carrot. I played 3 sports in college, and personal training and helping people with nutrition is very easy for me because I'm able to get to a deeper level with individuals. However, I wasn't initially. When I was a freshman in college, we look at stats, right? 1 in 4 females are either sexually or assaulted or raped in their first 4 years of college. Now I fall into those stats. So with that comes a lot of different emotions that come with that piece of the puzzle. But then also too, I was in an extremely unhealthy relationship, a narcissist, verbally abusive, physical a couple of times, where I finally just cut the tie. I had to. I lived in fear. I lived in fear for at least a couple of years. For when I cut off the relationship, I was stalked for a couple of years, where every night I was looking through the blinds of my room, my bedroom. At that point, we had a 1.5-year-old together, and he would utilize my oldest as a pawn on how to get to the house or how to get in, because he knew during the day that I would avoid confrontation because I didn't want that to happen in front of our son. So he came from a family where his dad was abusive to his mother, extremely abusive, to the point where he had a shotgun, shot up all the furniture in the house. You name it. It was pretty extreme. And I actually worked with his mom. There's a huge age gap. She had him at age 14. And I happen to be clearly older than him as well. But I look back at those moments and those emotions, and it took me a long time to heal. It felt like I literally had hooks in my back, and I was dragging a body behind me for however many years. It was heavy. I worked with a life coach for at least a year. Now, the life coach wasn't one-on-one. The life coach was more so for business coaching. And what I didn't realize is that my past relationship was impacting my vision for my business. So I did a 90-day vision where I wrote down what my intentions were and what I wanted to achieve in those 90 days. And a lot of people just write goals. Well, I wrote my goals in present tense, that I had already achieved them, and added emotions into the goals so that I knew exactly how I was going to feel and how I wanted to feel. After those 90 days, it was crazy. It was like all of a sudden the light bulb came on. I felt completely different. The hatred, the anger, the sadness, all of those emotions that people view as negative, it was like the light came on. And I actually called him and I said, I just called to thank you. And he goes, Thank me. Thank me for what? It was almost like I could hear his jaw hit the floor. I want to thank you for all of the different experiences that we went through together. I said, because I wouldn't be able to connect with the women that I am working with today. I wouldn't be able to share the different stories on experiences that I've gone through, which a lot of them had also experienced. And it was a turning point in my life where different things would pop up. I had financial strain, being a single mom, at this point, later down the road, single mom of 2. It was opening my own gym that I had for 13 years, but I literally built it from the ground up, and it was open in literally 4 months, without having a business degree, and just knowing that I wanted something more for my children. And I remember counting in my head, am I going to have enough money to cover the amount of food that I have in my cart? And at that point in my community, I'm known pretty well because I do a lot of different community work with like the Special Olympics, the PD, CCRI, and within the school systems. So it was embarrassing. I also knew there was moments where ego came into play, where I had to check my ego. When you're scraping by and you're known within the community, then all of a sudden you're like, man, I really need help. I need assistance. So I remember applying for public assistance because it was to the point where I really needed to make sure I was covering what I needed to keep moving forward with my business and clearly put food on the table for my boys. I remember walking into the office, putting the hood on, hat pulled down so that people wouldn't recognize me. And I had a self-talk and a self-check of, Mariah, this is something that you need to do. Now, Your ego is telling you that you don't want to do this, but this is something that you have to do. So I had to check my ego at the door, in which I did. And, and then everything kind of fell into play how it was supposed to. But there was a lot of learning points. And there was a lot of points where I just really felt like, man, I can throw in the towel right now. But then I was like, no, I can't. My children need me. And, we were circling back to death. Jeffrey, you're talking about the fear of death. I did initially have the fear of death. I did. Because my kids were at the age where I didn't want them to go to their father if I was to pass away. And now that my children are more self-sufficient, that fear is no longer there. And I know that in my heart of hearts, like everything maps out how it's supposed to. And I want my children to understand that too. It's like having these conversations that are tough are the most rewarding, because you never know who's listening. When you're vulnerable with yourself and with others, now you have connection points and pieces that you can have with other individuals, and then they start sharing their stories and people start healing together.
That's really heavy. It's really heavy. And it goes back to mindset and the willingness to want to basically get out of your own way. It seems like that's a lot of some of our issues. It's like, whether it's ego or all of this other stuff, unpackaged trauma, and it's just all of it's necessary to get out of our own way to become the person that we're really meant to be. And it's anybody listen to this, I'm not saying this flippantly like it's an easy process, because I know it's not. Unpackaging and there, being in therapy and all the steps in a process of getting out of your own way is really, really difficult. And I don't think, like you said in the beginning, like we're never, I'm complete now. I'm a complete human being. I mean, we're always hopefully working through the process of becoming the best human being, but I don't know, seeing the issues that we need to take care of. And like I said, getting out of our own way is a big process. And, but that's really powerful, hearing you saying that you were calling your ex-husband, or I'm not sure the nature of the relationship, but again, it goes back to these things are happening for us. They're not happening to us. And to be able to see that, I mean, people listen to this, I probably all heard it. Like, I wouldn't be the person I was without all the bullshit that I went through. If it was all, sunshine and rainbows, Pat wouldn't have been a UFC welterweight champion, Hall of Fame. It's just these things he used as fuel to the fire to help, become who he is. And again, anybody listen to this, don't be afraid to go through the process of getting out of your own way. You're like I said, it's a lifelong process, but man, it's so freaking rewarding when you start seeing circumstances and situations in a way different than you did before, and you just cope and you deal with it differently than in any kind of toxic way. But it's hugely gratifying, man. It's hugely gratifying to go through the fire and to go through the bullshit. It sucks. It's painful sometimes, but in the end, it's so many aspects of our life are rewarded for it.
Well, and if
in my humble opinion.
Well, yeah, and if you want to rise, you have to do the work. Imagine being in water, right? And you're trying to swim, and you've got a life vest on, and it's like, all right, I'm getting closer, I'm getting closer, I'm getting closer, and then all of a sudden you feel a tug where you're tugged underneath the water. And now it's like, when people bob up and down in the water, imagine that is all your trauma that is pulling you down. And what if you made a choice to work through that trauma? All of a sudden, you're not getting pulled down as many times. And now pretty soon you can get rid of that life vest and you can swim. That's what it's like. And that's what it feels like when you're doing the work and you're diving into the emotional trenches, which suck. And I'm just going to tell you that right now. You might as well get 50 damn shovels, because that's what it feels like. You do the work, you start digging, then you're like, all right, well, I broke that shovel because it was heavy. All right, well, good thing you got another shovel. Let's move on to the next. Let's keep digging. I can't give or justice to words on how powerful it is when you really just don't give a shit about what anybody else thinks about you, because you're so confident in who you are.
You've been listening to the Self-Defense Warrior Podcast with Jeffrey Wilson and Pat Militich. Watch the complete interview on Red Voice Media Premium using the link below, completely uncensored and ad-free. Not a member yet? Try it for $1.